Kabbalists believe that God speaks the world into being through the power of language, and that by learning Hebrew and other sacred languages you can plug into that primal creative energy force. Okay, so that's the Kabbalah, and that got me really interested, and I've studied it for years. I've met famous Kabbalists and read all the texts, like especially the Zohar and the Sefer Yetzirah and these things. Okay. And it's an oral tradition because it predates writing. So it goes back to an earlier time than the writing of the Bible. It's an oral tradition. Right. And I believe, I'm absolutely certain, one can prove that Jesus was learned in the Kabbalah as well. The word means simply a receiving, a giving. It's what a rabbi does with a student. They give a teaching face to face, orally. Okay, so Jesus did that. He was a Kabbalist.
Yes.
And I'm not, one of my heroes of the great Catholic Renaissance going on in Rome was a man called Cardinal Egidio.
Never heard.
Look him up when you're in Rome. He was the cleverest guy in Rome, right?
Okay.
And he knew this. He had people working for him in his cardinal's house, translating the Zohar into Latin.
Really?
He was working on the Kabbalah and its influence on Christianity, right? And then unfortunately in 1527 this army of thugs marched down from Germany and smashed up Rome, and they burned his library. I mean, what we lost in the 1527 assault on Rome is just scandalous. That's why I'm with the scholars instead of the thugs.
Yes. Yeah.
So anyway, so there's the Kabbalah. I could go on about that. Then there's this other tradition called the runes, which are really interesting. That's an oral tradition about the importance of sacred sound, going back to Norse, Germanic, Scandinavian, Anglo-Saxon sources.
Very interesting.
Connected with the god Odin and the rest of the team, and the idea of the Yggdrasil, the sacred tree, and each letter, each sound, is part of the creative understanding of how God creates the universe, Odin, the god of wisdom. And I've met rune masters, and women particularly, they're very learned. Freya Aswin is one of the great scholars of the runes. And what I realised is that they must go back to a common source. The runes of the Norse people and the Kabbalah of the Semitic peoples, including the Hebrew and Arabic and Ethiopian stuff, and Babylonian, they must go back to a primal, a pre-Neolithic, Paleolithic, tribal shamanic culture, when our ancestors were first exploring sounds and languages, when we were first thinking words, right? And we saw that as a sacred thing, which it is. And the Rig Veda and the Hindus were doing the similar thing in Sanskrit, right? So what I've done in the Kabbalah runes, I've argued there's a hypothesis that they all go back to a primal origin. And can we see traces of similarity between the runic interpretation of sounds and the Kabbalistic interpretation of sounds? And you can. It's like they map onto each other. And I produced a kind of guide to that, which is both a linguistic hypothesis, but it's also a metaphysical hypothesis. Could be used by practicing, people wanting to understand the meaning of life, as well as scholars trying to understand the origins of language. And in that I've woven the Ogham of the Druid understanding. And, going back to the peace sword, the letters on it, the tradition, which I find very interesting, is that Phineas Farsaith, found in the first Druid school, in the plain of Shinar, to capture the original language before Babel, when we all still spoke the same language. Now that's the legend given by Geoffrey Keating. And it's sort of like all myths, it tells the truth, So all the words for peace, they go back to a common root. And that's what I've tried to explore in the book, The Kabbalah Runes. But it's not been reviewed, it's not, it's like, I keep a sort of low profile so I can get on with the work, I don't want fatwas against me,
You're coming into the world now with this interview.
Oh, well, it'll be seen by a few people at Trinity, that's it.
But it's interesting how so many of the world cultures have similarities rather than differences in their religions and the primordial sounds which you've mentioned. I was thinking of the mantras and Indian religious traditions,
Yeah.
such as Om and different ones like that.
Yeah, and even in Tibetan and stuff, the Buddhists went for this big time.
Mm.
So the sound carries the energy of the thing. And does something magical. I mean, we humans, that's our power. We are magical sound-making creatures,
Yes.
which then leads to symbolization, and writing comes much later. It's the first thousands and thousands of years we were speakers and singers because we sang and chanted these sounds. You know, I've discovered empirically they work. Like if I'm stuck in traffic and I invoke Tara, the Tibetan goddess of getting stuff done, I have a particular Tara chant, the traffic clears.
Uh-huh.
You know, now I can't explain that except that it works. So I think it's interesting that legend says that Stonehenge was brought from Ireland through the power of sound.
Through the power of sound.
Yeah, Merlin brought it. I mean, that's one of the legends in Druid stuff. You know, I'm not sure I would agree that that was literally the case, but I would say the people who were hauling these great blocks of stone from the Preselles were chanting and using sound because they discovered that you could haul these great things much easier if you're all doing the ho chant, you know, at once or whatever. And you can see like a Merlin figure would be organising the chanting to make that possible.
And probably for Newgrange as well. I remember reading that it took 80 men just to pull one curbstone they're called, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. They would have done their chanting and found that the sound empowered the placing of these great boulders and things.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right, what's your next question here?
I suppose a question that we haven't really spoken about, and I think we might try and put some pictures into the video, if we can. So I suppose our location, so where actually are we? And what is the name of this building, and what is its importance, perhaps?
Well, it's a miraculous place, I found. I mean, I was living in a castle in Loch Goyle, Argyll, beautiful part of the world, but too many midges and too much rain. Then Brexit happened, and I'm a total opponent of the ignorance of Brexit and the Westminster arrogance, thinking that they can smash up the European Union in the name of some kind of like whatever they think they're doing, English nationalism. And so I decided I wanted to come and live in Europe, and found this place in the middle of France through some miraculous friends. It's as big as my castle was in Scotland. It's got enough space for all my 12,000 books and archives and papers, you know, historic library. It's in the middle of the most perfectly beautiful countryside in a little known department of France called La Creuse,
Yes, very
named
beautiful.
after the river La Creuse. It's like a paradise, really. And I discovered it's right in the heart of Old Gaul. So just down, and we're near Auvergne, which is a department where Vercingetorix, the great Druid chieftain, lived, who tried to stop Caesar. It's a tragic sort of story. I mean, he actually defeated Caesar in a battle once, but then lost and was taken to Rome in chains and killed. But he was selected by the Druid Council, which met in Chartres. So it's steeped in history, and all the villages around here have got little menhirs and Druid sanctuary places. There's a local hill that's full of Druid mysteries.
That we're meant to visit, I think.
I think if we have time.
Yes.
Yeah, so, and I've fallen in love with France. I speak French. I'm a sort of Francophile. My mother was a French teacher. We came here on holiday every year. And I've always thought of myself as a European. I'm British, Canadian, Francophile, part Celtic, universal thinker, you know. And I won't be boxed in by the stupidity of Brexit and this pseudo-nationalist stuff that they've created. I mean, it's actually anti the interests of Britain and anti the interests of the English. And it was created by fake media and Timothy Snyder's brilliant exercise in history on how Putin engineered the Brexit vote indirectly with wealthy offshore kind of interests like Rishi Sunak and all this crew of multi-billionaires, Farage, Murdoch, they're all scoundrels in my opinion. So anyway, I've taken refuge in France, which is a haven for civilized values of liberty, equality and fraternity.
Yes.
And vive la République.
Oui. Absolument.
Voila.
But so the name of this place is called the Musée des Muses, or well, it's also a peace museum as well. Is that right?
Absolutely. It's got two names. The Musée des Muses, which is the first ever museum dedicated to the 9 Muses. They've given their name to music and to museums. These 9 goddesses who I discovered when I was in Oslo in the university library there once, reading an archaeological survey of Athens, that archaeologists had discovered that in the original academy of Plato there was a temple to the Muses built. And I just thought, this is so romantic and like brilliant. Obviously being a poet who is a lover of the Muses, I thought, that's really cool, Plato doing that.
Absolutely.
And so I said, well, let's revive it. So we have here a museum of the Muses. Each room is a different muse, one of the 9 sisters. The greatest Freemasonic lodge of the 18th century was called the Lodge of the 9 Sisters, named after the 9 Muses. It included Voltaire, one of whose descendants is a friend of mine.
Yes.
And it included Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and Jeremy Bentham, Joseph Priestley, who discovered oxygen, Lavoisier. They were all members of this Lodge of the 9 Sisters. So I'm sort of doing a one-man band revival of the Enlightenment here, in the teeth of the opposition of what I call Sophiophobia.
Yes. Did you invent that word, or has it?
No, I invented the word Sophiophobia, which means it's the opposite of philosophy, which is the love of wisdom. Sophiophobia is the fear of wisdom. And it's very common and popular. The crowd that killed Jesus was Sophiophobes. Oh, we don't want anyone teaching, And the lot that martyred all the saints and Sufis and that killed Ali and Imam Hussein, and every religion has a litany of people who've been martyred and killed for being too knowledgeable. Because the mob don't like intelligence.
Buddhism.
Even in Buddhism, although I think Buddha was quite sneaky because of his refusal to answer leading questions. He sort of dodged, and so he got to live to a ripe old age of 80. And his disciples, on the whole, haven't been too vicious and killing each other. But still, they've had their martyrs, and tragically in our time, they've even started causing trouble of their own, like in Burma, where they've gone attacking the Muslims and stuff.
Yes.
These aren't real Buddhists, in my opinion.
It's not Buddhism in practice at all.
It's sort of some sort of cultural fetish that I wear these robes, so I'm this type of person, and I'm going to attack you because you wear different kinds of clothes. I think Buddha would be appalled.
He'd be saying, "What are you guys doing?"
Yeah. I'm a great lover of the Dzogchen tradition of Buddhism, and going for the primal enlightenment, which predates the houses of religions. I've just been doing my tarot of the gods, the god Pihar, who's the great bond deity that Padmasambhava got to be a protector of the Dharma. And so I believe the same way. We need a bunch of new Padmasambhavas to come and make the Buddhist protectors of the Islamic Dharma or the Christian Dharma or the Jewish Dharma. We should be protecting them all, not like saying, "Oh, we're better than you." That's all coming from ego. And the point of enlightenment is to go beyond ego.
It is.
Which is why I call what I do sort of metta Mahayana. But I'll explain that maybe at the end.
A word about the Tarot of Gods. It's the latest book that Thomas has been working on, which is a tarot deck but based on the gods, and encompasses a huge variety of gods from different world traditions. And it's going to be dynamite. Isn't that correct?
I think it should deserve to be well known. I mean, I was a religious studies teacher in schools for years. If I'd have had it, I would have used it to start every class. Would have gone around the class saying, like, choose your god for the day.
Yes.
And then we would have started the lesson with a 10-minute study of Bihar or Krishna or whatever. It's really interesting. It's a really interesting way into understanding all religions. Because I've got African gods, Asian, American, And every tribe has its gods, you know, we should honour them. I don't agree with Augustine's rather simplistic view that everyone that isn't a Catholic god is like a devil. You know, poor old Augustine had smelt the fumes of Manichaean dualism for too long, and it had done his head in a bit. I'm much more with Pelagius, who was a very wise Christian druid. The tarot of the gods, I think, deserves to be. It will be dynamite in the right hands, you know, and it's got Allah in there, it's got Yahweh, and I've gone into really in depth scholarship of what we know about Allah or Yahweh or all these other gods, also the Egyptian gods. So I think if there's one tool that can transform the world to a place of wisdom, it would be this tarot of the gods. And I've done it because there's lots of goddess tarots you can buy, but nobody's yet done a tarot of the gods. It's fallen to me to, like I say, I tend to do the stuff nobody else has thought of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Coming soon. And you also mentioned that you invented the word Sophiaphobia, but I believe you've also invented some other words, and that you've actually written a dictionary of new words.
I have, yes.
It's quite revolutionary.
Yeah, well, actually, potentially, yeah. Like the Lu complex, the Celtic god of light, and yes, it occurred to me, you know, during my studies and teaching career that philosophers often coin new words, and we know the word and the philosopher, they go together. Like Jeremy Bentham coined the word internationalism, which we now just take for granted, but it was actually coined by somebody. And because I'm interested in etymology, I'm very interested in when words come into being and why they're coined. I was influenced by a guy called Raymond Williams, who was a great professor of English at Cambridge. He wrote a book called Key Words, which kind of did that, studies. So then I thought, well, why don't we coin new words instead of like studying what other people have coined? Let's get some new words on the table, because if we're going to make a new planetary peace civilization, we have to start using new words. So instead of Brexit, I coined Bremain. Bremain, yeah. Instead of terrorism, I coined the word joyism. Because terrorism is a silly word, a silly idea. The idea is that you do acts of cruelty and horror and mass killing in order to advance a good political project. I mean, how stupid is that? It's like,
it's ridiculous.
You know, it's absurd. It's ill thought out. So as a philosopher, I've coined the word joyism, whereby you, to advance a good political project, you use joyful things like concerts, dances, exhibitions, you know, art. You use joyful means to get across the message you want. So if the Palestinians, say, had been using joyism as their methodology, they'd have a state by now, if instead of using terrorism.
Yes.
And if whoever was behind 9/11 hadn't done that and had done joyous things, the world wouldn't be so totally screwed up as it has been since then. So I'm trying to plant seeds of joyful thought in amongst the chaos of you know, the world culture that we're living in, which is based on Sophiaphobia and the suppression of truth. I'm trying to like encourage the seeds of true Dharma to blossom again by coining new words. And yeah, I published a dictionary on it. And I'm still coining new words as I go along.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. So I suppose moving on, and perhaps coming back to our audience or anyone else who may be interested, we've spoken a little bit about Ireland.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, as an Irish person, coming from there, what your relation is to our country, and have you done any kind of work there, or your views on how Brexit might be affecting the North and the peace process?
Gosh, well, I mean, yes, I've got a lot of views on all that. I mean, I love Ireland. I first went in the 80s. My father was part Irish. I've always had a great respect for its culture and history. And when I went in the 80s for the first time and travelled about and met people, I was really interested in its esoteric history. I went to the Fellowship of Isis headquarters and met Reverend Durden Robertson in the castle at Clonagall. And he told me to read Geoffrey Keating, He was a Church of Ireland vicar and the founder of the Fellowship of Isis, and a Druid. And I mean, his library was enormous. So I've always found a great respect for learning in Ireland. What I like about Ireland was the intellectual history of it, the Druids, but also that carried on. You know, the early Christians were very profound, as I discovered. I became friends with a guy called Dr. Sean English, who was running the Sarol Scoil na hÉireann, the Free University of Ireland, in Dublin. And I was on the management board of that and used to go to meetings, and it does PhDs and students and things.
On Prussia Street, isn't it?
On Prussia Street, yeah. And so I've been to Ireland many times. I've spent time exploring it all. And in the kind of 90s, I was already involved with the Druid community of Britain. I was the peace officer of the Druids of Britain. We were invited by the Druids of Ireland to come and do a peace symposium at Tara. And we did a ceremony for peace at Tara with the Irish Druids meeting the British Druids. And it was wonderful. There were, quite a few of us there. And we did our ceremonies. I said prayers for peace and so on. And a couple of months later, the Good Friday peace agreements were signed. And one of the Druids who was there said, well, I've heard through the grapevine that some of the IRA intelligentsia came to our service and were so impressed with you British Druids they decided to declare peace after all.
Really?
That's what he said. I can't say it's true or not, but I mean it's possible, isn't it?
Good.
And I've always taken the view that in Britain and Ireland we've got more in common than than people realise. I was shocked the more I discovered about Irish history and how ancient it is. It had an ancient poetry tradition. As a poet, I love poetry, going back to the Bronze Age, as old as the Greek. The old poems of Cuchulainn and all the rest of them, as old as Homer. So why wasn't this being taught in British schools? Why wasn't Irish an option as a GCSE in all the schools I taught in England? Why don't the people of England get taught there's this thing called Ireland with these very ancient wise people who were serious sages when you guys were still in Denmark? It's just a sort of total ignorance about Irish history. So the more I got interested in it and studied it privately, and I got loads of books, and I photocopied Joyce's books, and I accumulated a library on the history of Ireland, I could see that there was some injustice going on here. And when I studied things like Bloody Sunday and the Time of Troubles, and the suppression of knowledge about Ireland, it made me annoyed. So I set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland in the 2000s, after supporting the Good Friday Agreement coming into existence. Thank God, Mo Olam, thank you. And I thought our TRCBI would just be a historical inquiry type thing, so people could come out of the woodwork and tell the horrors of what they'd seen or witnessed or done, and apologise. What I didn't realise is that the same Tory right-wing fanatics that promote this sort of jingoistic Britain rules the waves nonsense were going to come out of the woodwork and do Brexit. Which was a kick in the teeth for all Europhiles, all people that believe in internationalism and peace. It was a sort of a mad project, in my opinion, that came totally from nowhere, and it was invented by the extreme right, the Trump, the Murdoch, the Farage, these billionaire people, the Mercers who were behind Trump, and their equivalents in Britain, who don't care about ordinary people. They don't actually want us in Europe and Ireland and Britain to be happy and be able to visit and live in each other's countries. And so why are they doing it? Okay, so in my analysis, I think it's to do with the military roots of capitalism. Amongst many other things, I'm doing a commentary on the works of Marx, Das Kapital. And I reckon Marx was a clever chap, but he missed one fundamental thing. And I'm saying this in my commentary. He made a fatal mistake. He forgot to realise the importance of militarism and war in the history of the formation of capital. He talks very intelligently about the impact of technology on capital formation, like factories, industrialisation leads to capital accumulation, blah blah. But the biggest single impact on technological advancement is war. It's like the machine gun, the rocket, the tank, the cyber warfare that's going on.
The nuclear bomb.
The nuclear bomb, yeah. So this is, and I think it's those guys who run the British and American arms trade that wanted Brexit. They wanted Britain as a sort of offshore safety island for their military capitalism to carry on. And I don't want that. I want Britain to come back as a peace-loving nation, as part of Europe, in a continent free of war. So, an island to me is the test case. I believe, according to the Good Friday Agreement, there should be a referendum on whether the North and South want to rejoin. It's actually in writing in the Good Friday Agreement, yes, it is. Yes, it says, there's a clause that says, this is the agreement. If any future hugely important constitutional changes are done, the people of the North have the right to say if they want to join the South. It's black and white. And that's why the Murdoch media never say this. That's why the Tory-run press, including the BBC in Britain, there's a complete blackout on this. So I think it's really important people stand up for their rights. And Ireland has the right to be united and free of war and militarism, in my opinion. Instead of part of this crazy Brexit, rule Britannia, we love our bombs type of, we all worship the Queen and the nuclear bomb type nonsense. We're just people who have the right to live in peace in a continent of peace.
I think the general sort of feeling towards Brexit among young people in Ireland, from what I've noticed, is almost a kind of an indifference. It's a kind of, well, here's this Brexit thing, it's a pretty bad idea, but most people aren't actually too bothered about it, so I feel. But do you think perhaps we should be bothered about it?
Well, I think for all kinds of reasons we should be bothered about it, yes, because it's a kick in the teeth to the Irish peace process and it endangers the Good Friday Agreement. And if the Brexit people have their way, all the advances of the Good Friday process, the peace process, will be reversed. So that's one reason we should be worried. The other reason is just it's anti-human in that people like me who are British passport, our right to stay and live and work in Europe has now been taken away. I mean, fortunately I was here in time to stay, but my children can't come and do this. I think that's a dumbing down of the English and the British people, the Welsh, the Scots and so on. So I think Europe is an experiment in internationalism which should be supported. And so I propose the European Union have a mediation service. We should be doing peace work. So that's another reason to oppose it. Another reason is that Scotland is absolutely annoyed at Brexit and is going to reach independence from the UK over it. And I support the right of the Scots to have an independence referendum. I lived in Scotland. I respect their right to go a different route. They don't want Brexit. They don't want to be part of this Tory mad cabal that runs the UK and has hijacked it. I mean, Boris Johnson isn't even English. He hasn't got a clue about any values. The whole thing is premised on lies and mistruth. And that's no way to run a country, So, so I'll continue to run the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland, and continue to fight against the after effects of Brexit. I believe it will be reversed in our lifetimes, and I can't wait.
Okay.
And in a few weeks' time, I think Boris Johnson is off, back to join his criminal cronies, and we can get back to the business of actually building a peaceful continent here.
Johnson, do you hear this? The light workers are coming.
Thank you, yes.
Okay, thank you. I suppose maybe we could move on to another question. Okay, I see love and personal stuff here with question marks. So perhaps the nuts and bolts of human experience. I suppose we can get very philosophical about life, but ultimately we still have to eat, sleep and work and love.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on, I mean, young people are particularly involved in perhaps the latter, relationships and these kind of questions dominate our lives. So,
No, it's a very important topic actually, and I think personal relationships are the testing ground for philosophers. You know, I've got one unfinished book called Philosophers' Wives. I was going to look at the history of like all the great philosophers of history and their relationship to women, and vice versa, great female philosophers and what they made of relationships. I think that'd be really interesting. Like Aristotle was very happily married, so was Hegel. You know, I think it's a mark of a person of deep thinking, is to be able to enjoy that, you know, personal, domestic bliss as well. There are other schools that say no, to be seriously into spirituality you should be celibate, and sex is not for you kind of thing. I went through a phase of that. I tried the celibacy thing, and it was a very good creative time of my life. Brahmacharya time. I think every serious scholar should spend at least a few years celibate. But then I decided to have a family, and I've got 3 beautiful daughters. I think one shouldn't always be celibate, because I think we have a duty to help create the next generation of seekers and devotees of the gods. I've been blessed by some amazing relationships in my life. In the Druid community we have what's called hand fastings, and they last for a certain time. They can last for a year and a day, and you can renew them.
oh, that's right. Yeah.
You know, or they can just naturally lapse because human nature sort of moves on.
They're called moon marriages, are they as well?
Yeah, you can have a moon marriage where it lasts for a moon, you know, in that sort of heady first flush of falling in love stuff. But then you can renew them each moon for a year and so on. So I think, and in fact the Druid community used to have like a Mercury marriage, a Jupiter marriage, according to the cycling of the planets.
Sun marriage.
Yeah. Anyway, to cut a long story, I've come to the view that love affairs are a bit painful. They can cause headaches and anxiety and, you know, all the pangs of love. So I've come to the view, I've coined the phrase a wisdom affair. I advocate that people, young people, old people, whoever, instead of having love affairs, which normally end in tears, should have wisdom affairs. What's the difference between a wisdom affair and a love affair? Okay, so I've written a book about this. A wisdom affair is a conscious commitment to have an intelligent love affair, which is dedicated to the higher pursuits of spiritual and intellectual work. So that instead of just a sort of sensual type thing, a love affair, and, you know, all the passion of all that stuff, you sublimate that. You do have that dimension if you want, but you do it in a disciplined way. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we talk about Maithuna, which is the congress of 2 devotees who are drawing on the sexual energies for enlightenment. It's called Tantra. So a wisdom affair is a sort of tantric model in which relationships are not just for self-gratification or indulgence, but for enlightenment projects. And I think there's tremendous unexplored potential there. You know, for particularly young people, start early, get on the enlightenment path early, I would say. You know, and let's transform the world through those energies. That's kind of what I'm saying, which is sort of slightly radical position.
It is very radical.
Yeah, but it's also actually orthodox in the sense, say, the Catholic Church teaches that marriage is the sacrament. It's a holy thing, but it doesn't teach you how to do the sacrament. What is the sacrament? You're sort of left after the service. We keep watching marriages going up and down. You know, the vicar comes, says some words, and then they're left, the couple. Wisdom affair kicks in at that moment. Because I would say if you get married, then also make a wisdom affair.